Confession time, I was one of those kids in school that really loved reading classics. I found being able to read a story written by an author that was written like decades before I was born, and being able to get a perception, an idea of how life existed at that time and what their dreams and hopes and of the characters that they created during that time were, was just enlightening for me. So when I was just thinking about all the classic books I've read and all the ones that I plan to read, 10 books stuck in my mind as 10 classics I absolutely want to read before I die. And we'll start with the Mahabharata by Vyasa, which is an Indian epic poem that basically talks about decades of sparring between two families that ends up culminating in a 19-day war. I love epic poems. I was a big fan of the Odyssey and the Iliad the first time I discovered them. I went looking for Virgil's Aeneid. I, of course, read Ovid's poems. So I've always had a love relationship with epic poetry, because being able to read about these characters, being able to see stories that span centuries, sometimes even millennia, and being able to be as engrossed in a story in that format, which is not usually the type of format I read often, because I love prose, but poetry, especially epic poetry, I always have a soft spot in my heart for it. And the Mahabharata sounds exactly like the epicness that I want to. And also it occurred to me that I actually, even though I do read a lot of books on mythology across various countries, it occurred to me that I've not read any with regards to Indian mythology, and that's the reason why the Mahabharata makes this list, and not just this list, but is number one on my list. So yeah, if you have any recommendations with regards to a translation that you really like, let me know down in the comments below, because I am definitely looking for where I can get it. And then there's The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I have a pocket-sized copy. I won't call it pocket size, a mass market copy of this book, and I've had it now for over 3 years, and I still have not gotten around to reading it, even though I do believe that a lot of the principles that was pushed by Sun Tzu, it's not just relevant with regards to war strategies, but it's also strategies that can be adapted to real life, to situations that we encounter in our everyday existence. And it's definitely a book I've always wanted to read. I find war strategies very fascinating. It's also the reason why I find stories that feature war very fascinating. So The Art of War by Sun Tzu is definitely a classic that has been on my TBR for like forever, for way before I got the copy, and it's a classic I absolutely want to read before I die. Hopefully I get to read it sometime really soon. And then there's The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, to be precise. I have always found it very fascinating, especially when our perception of religion and theology is based off of works of literature, based off of classics. And Dante's Divine Comedies is a poem, is yet another epic poem. Like, obviously you can see my fascination with epic poetry as a form of narrative storytelling, so I am not going to make any apologies for it. I do love epic poems, and in this we follow Dante's travels, of course, through hell, purgatory and paradise. And I have a copy of The Divine Comedy. It's big, it has art, it's gorgeous, stunning. God, I can't. The minute I got it, I knew. I was just so happy, because I've been looking for a compilation of all three. Because a lot of times when people talk about The Divine Comedy, they always pick one of the three books that they are familiar with. So a lot of people are familiar with Dante's Inferno, for example. Some of them are familiar with Paradiso. A few people Purgatorio. So, but being able to have all three books in one compilation had always been my desire. And the minute I got that copy last year, I knew that I would finally get the chance to read it. So definitely being able to see the story of a soul's travel on its way to meet God, and the different stops it has to make along the way, I've always found that, like I said, very fascinating. So definitely a classic I want to read before I die. Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. And then there's Beloved by Toni Morrison. I'm going to admit I have never read any Toni Morrison's books, even though I have loved seeing her on stage. I've loved her giving speeches. I love the way her mind works, and I know that she would probably write one of the most beautiful books. And Beloved is definitely a book I've always wanted to read. I found it fascinating, this whole concept of haunting, this whole concept of not being able to let let go of guilt until the guilt itself has a physical, almost supernatural manifestation. And it's set after the Civil War. We know that it was inspired by a real life story, and the character of Sethi and Beloved, and exactly how it is that she tries to marry a decision she made when she was younger, and how it has so affected her life decades after, is something I find fascinating. And I want to read that book so bad. I know it definitely deals with a lot of heavy topics, and I know I'm going to have to brace myself, but Beloved is definitely a classic I want to read before I die. And then there is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I'm not going to lie. The first time I got the opportunity to read this book, I handed it back to the friend that was lending me a copy, because I'm like, no, there is absolutely no way in hell I'm going to read a classic that big. So now look at me, see me and my shamelessness that has decided that, oh, One Piece is definitely going to be one of the books I'm going to read. I want to see exactly this book that some consider Leo Tolstoy's magnus opus. I want to read it. I want to see if I would enjoy it. I want to follow this 5 Russian aristocratic family as they deal with war and changes and the invasion of France in Russia. I definitely am fascinated by this era. I'm fascinated by exactly how it is that the aristocrats would react to this invasion, because it's funny. I think it's always interesting. A lot of times when you're looking at war and you're looking at invasion, a lot of this perspective is usually told from the perspective of the poor, the working class. That's what a lot of books focus on. So I have definitely been interested in War and Peace for a while, and it's definitely a classic that is high on my list. Is it a classic that I am certain would probably take me months to finish? Yes, that book is massive, and the print is tiny. The print is tiny. That book is massive, but it's definitely a classic I want to read before I die. Send help, someone, please. I am definitely going to need it, because I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know why I even thought that reading One Piece is a good idea. But here I am, and I cannot get my mind to stop thinking about it. So yeah, definitely One Piece by Leo Tolstoy. And then there's The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I am not going to lie. The first time I heard about the premise of this book, a society whereby women are basically treated like chattel, it was very, very terrifying, because we already know how terrible things are for women in today's present society. So imagining a future where this happens was terrifying, because based on the trajectory of the way in which women's rights and women's bodies and women's autonomy are slowly being eroded by misogynistic patriarchal laws, it was terrifying for me, because this is a possible future that I could see how it could become a reality. So the thought of spending time in that world always terrified me, but now I have reached the age and the time when I figured that, you know what, I actually want to read The Handmaid's Tale. I want to see Margaret Atwood's portrayal of this age. I want to see the women resist and fight back. I definitely want to go through all the entire gamut of emotions that I am fairly certain I would experience while reading this book. So yeah, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. You all probably will not understand the significance of me putting this on my classics I want to read before I die list, because 5 years ago I made a promise to myself that I was never going to touch this book. Clearly, past Noria didn't know shit. And then there's Chakra by Thomas Mofolo, which is basically a retelling, an epic retelling of the rise and fall of the Zulu king Chakra, or as we all know him, Shaka Zulu. I've been fascinated by Shaka Zulu ever since I first heard of his story when I was in primary school. I was like, what, 9? Yeah, about 8, 9. And I found that story interesting, but it was just a short summary of his life, and I wanted more. So the first time I discovered that Thomas Mofolo actually wrote almost a 200-page book retelling of the life of Shaka Zulu, I was like, I had to read it. So it's definitely a book I'm interested in reading. It was originally written in Sotho, and I think it's been translated twice in English, twice, and I want to get both translations so I can read both translations and see exactly where it differed and what stayed the same. But definitely Chaka by Thomas Mofolo is high on the list of classics I want to read before I die, because I don't think we don't have a lot of retelling and stories, epic stories spawned from the lives of amazing African leaders We just don't. I'm still looking for a good enough epic story that captures the life and role of Queen Amina of Zaria, Moremi of Ife, Yasapewa of Ghana, Makeda of Ethiopia. Like, there are so many amazing African queens and monarchs in our past history that we don't have stories of them anymore. So definitely Thomas Mofolo's Chakra is high on my list of classics to read before I die. And then there's The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born by Ayikwe Ama. I'm not gonna lie, the first time I came in contact with this book, I was in primary school. I think I was in grade 5. Yes, I was in grade 5, so I just turned 10. And one of my teachers offered me a copy. I read the first 2 pages and I was like, what on earth is this? And I closed it. Yeah, it's funny. As a child, I used to read a lot of classics, but I just could not vibe with Aikwe Ama's writing at that point in my life. Q, almost, 20 years later, about 2 decades later, and I am eager and ready to read that book. I think it's fascinating, the story of a man who would not be bribed and who lived in a world where corruption was all around him, but is persistent in not being corrupt, in being honest with his dealings with others, even though he faced quite a lot of ridicule from those around him, and exactly how he paid off, and this eventual hope for a Ghana where life would be better, where there would be honest leaders. I've always found fascinating, very fascinating. So I know I am definitely old enough to read it now. I know I'm definitely old enough to understand the themes better, and I know I'm definitely old enough to enjoy the story. So I am going to give it another reread, even though that was the very first ever DNF of my life because I was 10. But yes, definitely The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born by Ayikwe Ama. A classic I absolutely want to read. Definitely would read. I repeat, it's funny because at that age, I'd read Things Fall Apart, I loved it. I'd read No Longer at Ease, I loved it. I'd read Arrow of God, I loved it. So Ayikwe, I couldn't vibe with his writing then, but I have seen other writers that write similar styles to him that I enjoy. So I'm definitely interested in reading it, even though I think part of what scarred me was there was this very descriptive scene about dirt and sheets and snot and a level of disgustingness on banisters that people were touching. Is very, Ayikwe is very descriptive with his writing, and I remember I can't remember a lot of what I read in that book, but I remember the feeling of I would never touch a banister again in my life that I felt after reading that. And now, no matter, even if it is that it's a long distance, I still don't touch banisters because his writing scarred me for that. So is that good, and definitely a classic I want to read before I die. And then there is To Kill a Mockingbird by Apali. Yes, it might be surprising you, but I never read it. I'm not American, duh. So it was never any part of books I in any way came in contact with or had to read, but I've always heard so many things about it, racial injustice, the loss of innocence, exactly the role we play as a society in righting wrongs within our society, especially racial injustice. And I have always wanted to find out about Atticus and Finch and Boo, but I never got the chance to do so. So I am definitely putting To Kill a Mockingbird on my list of classics I absolutely want to read before I die, because I think it's important. I think the story it has to tell is very important. And like, Apali wrote that book and took a break, a long ass break, before she came out with her next book. So I can just imagine how tasking it must have been for her to write it, and how introspective it must be to read the book. So definitely To Kill a Mockingbird by Apali, a book I want to read, a classic I want to read before I die. And then finally, the last classic I want to read before I die, The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. I'm not gonna lie, I have not read a lot of feminist theory books. I am a feminist, yes. I'm certain nobody's surprised about that. But I've not read a lot of feminist theory books, and The Second Sex is definitely ranked high. It was the birth of the second wave of feminism. It is considered essential, important feminist literature. And I'm also not gonna lie, I know that apparently, I think they said that there's been some problematic things. I'm not sure if it is about the book or the writer herself. So I'm going to note that. I do know that. I think I heard something about, some things are problematic, but I'm not sure if it's with regards to her personally or the book. But I definitely want to read the book. I definitely want to broaden my reading with regards to feminist theory, because I haven't read practically, I haven't read much, if any, actually. So this conversation, this detailing of the treatment of women through history in 2 volumes, and basically giving a deeper understanding with regards to exactly why we fight for equality, it's something that I've always wanted to read, and I have seen copies of it around, so I definitely should pick it up one of these days and dedicate a couple of months to slowly taking that book in bits and pieces, because academic typewriting can also, for me, it's not as easy to read, but I think that that is what makes them even more impactful. So yeah, those are 10 classics I absolutely want to read before I die. Let me know what are some classics, because I know this is not an exhaustive list, of course. Please note that there are so many other classics I want to read and I intend to read, but these are just classics that for some reason or the other I've always put aside, but I know I absolutely want to read them. I am a lover of classics. I am a lover of books, so I would always read other books other than what I've mentioned. So these are just 10, because if I wanted to go on, I have 50, 60, 100 that I can almost always talk about. Which, by the way, if it is that you want something that exhaustive, let me know, but that is going to be a long ass video, and I'm not going to make it unless it is that it is categorically demanded of me, in a way. But yeah, those are 10 classics I absolutely want to read before I die. Let me know what are some classics you want to read. Drop them down in the comments down below. If any of those classics are absolute favorite of yours and you think I should bump them up my list, let me know so that I can bump them off my list. But yeah, that is the video. If you liked it, please do not forget to give it a big thumbs up. Click on that like button. It totally and completely always helps my channel. Check out my other videos. Subscribe if you want to. If you do decide to subscribe, please click on that notification bell so you can know every time I drop new videos, because sometimes I do go outside of my regular upload schedules with regards to putting up videos. But I make new videos every Sundays, Wednesdays and Fridays, and I'll see you soon. Until then, stay passionate, love books, love yourself. Bye.